Interlude at Masan. A new chapter in Korean operations began for the 1st Marine Division at 1800 on 16 December 1950 with the opening of the CP at Masan. By the following afternoon, all units of the division had arrived from Hungnam with the exception of VMO-6 and small groups of such specialists as the amphibian tractor troops left behind to assist with the redeployment of the remaining 10 Corps elements to South Korea. The 1st Marine Division and 1st Marine Aircraft Wing were separated for the first time since the Inchon landing. VMF 311, the new Panther jet squadron, was flying from K9, an Air Force field near Busan. Operating together as an all-Marine carrier group taking part in the Hungnam redeployment were the 3 Corsair squadrons, VMF 212 on the CVL, light carrier, Bataan, VMF 214 on the CVE, Sicily, and VMF 323 on the CVE, Batong Strait. The 2 Japan-based night fighter squadrons, VMF N-542 and VMF N-513, flying from Itazuk, patrolled the skies between Japan and Korea. VMO-6, the observation squadron, consisting of helicopters and OY fixed-wing planes, was attached to various ships of the 7th Fleet for rescue missions when pilots were forced into the sea. A detachment of Marine Ground Control Intercept Squadron 1, MIG-SIS-1, and the entire Air Defense Section of Marine Tactical Air Control Squadron 2, MTAX-2, were also attached to the warships. They assisted in the control of hundreds of planes that flew over the Hungnam beachhead daily in support of the final stages of the 10 Corps evacuation. The 3 Marine Corsair squadrons on the Sicily, Batong Strait, and Bataan represented the entire air strength of Escort Carrier Task Group, TG 96.8, commanded by Rear Admiral Richard N. Rubel. Each squadron came directly under the operational command of the ship on which it had embarked. Supply, engineering, ordnance, billeting, and messing were of course provided through naval channels. The only relationship of the squadrons to their parent organization, MAG-33, derived from the administration of personnel and the storage of equipment at Itami. Return to the Bean Patch. Masan, the new division assembly area, was located about 27 air miles and 40 road miles west of Busan on the Bay of Masan, which indents the southern coast of the peninsula. In order to prepare for the arrival of the division, Brigadier General Edward A. Craig, the Assistant Division Commander, ADC, had flown from Hungnam with the advance party on 12 December to make necessary arrangements. The small seaport, which skirts the bay for about 2.5 miles, was untouched by the war as compared to the ravaged towns of northeast Korea. It had a protected anchorage, dock facilities, and good rail and road communications. There was an airstrip at Chinhae, a few miles to the southeast. Some sort of cycle seemed to have been completed by veterans of the 5th Marines when they found themselves back again in the familiar surroundings of the Bean Patch on the northern outskirts of Masan. This large cultivated field is entitled to capital letters because of its historical distinction as bivouac area of the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade after the Battle of the Noktong in August 1950. Barely 4 months had passed since that hard fight, but a great deal more history had been made during the combats of the Inchon Seoul and Chosin Reservoir campaigns. There was room enough in the Bean Patch for all 3 infantry regiments. Headquarters, the 11th Marines, the 1st Signal, 1st Tank, 1st Amtrak, 1st Ordnance, and 1st Motor Transport Battalions were located on the southern outskirts of town along with the 41st Independent Commando Royal Marines. The 1st Combat Service Group, the MP Company, and the 1st Service, 1st Shore Party, and 1st Engineer Battalions occupied the dock area of Masan proper. A large building in the center of town housed the division hospital, and the 7th Motor Transport Battalion was assigned to the Changwon area, 4 miles to the northeast. Peaceful as the surroundings may have seemed to troops who had just completed the 13-day running fight of the Chosin Reservoir breakout, the Chidisan mountain mass some 50 miles northwest of Masan had been for many years the hideout of Korean bandits and outlaws. The Japanese had never been able to clear them out, and the Republic of Korea had met with no better success. After the outbreak of civil war, they made some pretense of aiding the communist cause, but were actually preying upon the Rock Army and police for arms, food, clothing, and other loot. Operating in prowling bands as large as 50 or 60 men, the guerrillas were well armed with rifles, machine guns, and at times even mortars. In order to assure the safety both of its own bivouac areas and the vital port of Masan, Division promptly initiated measures to maintain surveillance over a broad belt of countryside which described an arc from Chinju, some 40 miles west of Masan, around to Changwon. The infantry and artillery regiments and the Division Reconnaissance Company were all assigned subsectors of this security belt. Daily motor patrols of not less than platoon strength were to be conducted in each subsector for the purpose of gaining information about the roads and the guerrillas as well as discouraging their activities. As it proved, however, no hostile contacts were made by the Marines during the entire Masan interlude. The guerrillas preferred to restrict their attention to the local police and civilian population. 1st Marine Division in USAC Reserve. At 22:40 on the 18th, a dispatch from Major General Edward M. Almond, U.S. Army, Commanding General of 10 Corps, informed the 1st Marine Division that it had passed to the operational control of the 8th Army. Major General Oliver P. Smith reported in one of his first dispatches to USAC that the Marines had received fresh rations on only 3 days since landing in Korea. The division commander invited attention to the importance of building up the physical condition of men who had lost weight during the Chosin Reservoir operation. An information copy went to Commander Naval Forces Far East, Comnav Phi, who reacted promptly by ordering a refrigeration ship to Masan with 50,000 rations of turkey. The G4 of USAC also responded with fresh rations from time to time until the Marines, in the words of General Smith, had turkey coming out of their ears. Games of softball and touch football became popular in the crisp, invigorating weather as the men rapidly recuperated from fatigue and nervous tension. A series of shows was put on by troops of U.S. Army and Korean entertainers, and the U.S. Navy sent Christmas trees and decorations. The first Christmas in Korea was observed with a memorable display of holiday spirit by men who had cause to be thankful. A choir from the 5th Marines serenaded division headquarters with carols on Christmas Eve, and all the next day the commanding general and ADC held open house for staff officers and unit commanders. The United States as a whole rejoiced over the news that the last of the 105,000 10 Corps troops had embarked from Hungnam on 24 December without a single life being lost as a result of enemy action. President Truman spoke for the nation when he sent this message to General MacArthur. Wish to express my personal thanks to you, Admiral Joy, General Almond, and all your brave men for the effective operations at Hungnam. This saving of our men in this isolated beachhead is the best Christmas present I have ever had. Photographers and press correspondents flocked to Masan during the holiday season for pictures and interviews about various aspects of the Chosin Reservoir Campaign. Among them was Captain John Ford, U.S. Navy Reserve, a successful motion picture director who had been recalled to active duty to make a documentary film depicting the role of the Navy and Marine Corps in Korea. He used scenes in the Masan area for background material. General Smith was informed that a motion picture company intended to produce a feature film entitled Retreat Hell, based on a remark attributed to him. Retreat Hell, we are just attacking in a different direction. When asked if these actually were his words, the division commander had a diplomatic answer. He said that he had pointed out to correspondents at Hagaru that the drive to Hamhung was not a typical withdrawal or retreat, and thus the statement attributed to me described my thinking, that of my staff and unit commanders, and my situation. During the Masan interlude, Colonel S.L.A. Marshall, U.S. Air Force Reserve, arrived as a representative of the Operations Research Office of Johns Hopkins University, which had been employed on military research projects by the Far East Command. Marshall, a well-known military analyst who had written several books about World War II operations, based his studies on personal interviews with scores of participants. The researcher was given a free hand at Masan. Aided by a stenographer, he interviewed officers and men from privates to commanding general. The resulting thousands of words went into a classified report entitled CCF in the Attack, Part 2, a study based on the operations of the 1st Marine Division in the Kodori, Hagururi, Udamni area, 20 November to 10 December 1950. General Ridgway, new USAC commander. Shortly after arrival at Masan, General Smith called a conference of unit commanders and emphasized that their task was to re-equip, resupply, repair, and rehabilitate. Officers and men of replacement drafts were to be integrated and given unit training as soon as possible. Both veterans and newcomers were soon training in regimental areas assigned by Colonel Alpha L. Bowser, the Division G3, who arranged for a 200-yard rifle range and a mortar range. On 23 December came the news that Lieutenant General Walton H. Walker, the 8th Army commander, had been killed in a Jeep accident. His successor, Lieutenant General Matthew B. Ridgway, U.S. Army, had commanded the U.S. 18 Airborne Corps in Europe during the final operations of World War II. Commencing his flight from Washington on the 24th, he landed at Tokyo just before midnight on Christmas Day. The new commander's task was made more difficult by the fact that the Korean conflict, at the end of its first 6 months, had become probably the most unpopular military venture of American history, both at the front and in the United States. From a mere police action at first, the struggle soon developed into a major effort in which the national pride suffered humiliations as a consequence of military unpreparedness. Far from building up the morale of the troops, letters and newspapers from home too often contributed to the doubts of men who asked themselves these questions. Why are we here, and what are we fighting for? Some of the answers were scarcely reassuring. It was insinuated, for instance, that Americans were fighting to make South Korean real estate safe for South Koreans. I must say in all frankness, commented General Ridgway in his memoirs, that the spirit of the 8th Army as I found it on my arrival gave me deep concern. There was a definite air of nervousness, of gloomy foreboding, of uncertainty, a spirit of apprehension as to what the future held. There was much looking over the shoulder, as the soldiers say. These criticisms were not applicable to the 1st Marine Division. Our men were in high spirits and busily engaged in getting ready to fight again, commented Brigadier General Edward A. Craig, ADC. In my travels around the various units of the division, and in talking to the men, I never even once noticed any air of nervousness or apprehension. When General Ridgway visited the division at Masan, he made a tour of the entire camp area and observed training and general arrangements. He stated that he was quite satisfied with the 1st Marine Division and its quick comeback from the Chosin fighting. General Ridgway learned soon after his arrival that the 8th Army staff had prepared a plan for a phased withdrawal to Pusan in case of necessity. He called immediately for a plan of attack. Prospects of putting it into effect were not bright at the moment, but at least it served to announce his intentions. Rumors were rife at this time that a general withdrawal from Korea, in virtual acknowledgment of defeat, was contemplated. In a letter of 1957, General Douglas MacArthur wrote an emphatic denial. I have no means of knowing whether such action may have been seriously considered in Washington, but, for my own part, I never contemplated such a withdrawal and made no plans to that effect. The front hugged the 38th parallel during the last week of December as the 8th Army held a defensive line along the Munsan-Chungcheon-Yangyang axis. 3 U.S. divisions were in a combat zone occupied largely by ROK units. The 24th and 25th Divisions, both reduced a third in strength by casualties, remained in contact with the enemy in West Korea, while the 1st Cavalry Division, also depleted in numbers, occupied blocking positions to the rear. Personnel and equipment losses suffered by the 2nd Division during the CCF counteroffensive of late November had rendered it non-effective as a tactical unit until it could be reinforced and re-equipped, and the 3rd and 7th Infantry Divisions had just landed in the Pusan-Ulsan area after the Hungnam redeployment. On 27 December 1950, the commanding general began a 3-day tour of 8th Army units at the front. He talked to hundreds of soldiers ranging from privates to unit commanders. There was nothing the matter with the 8th Army, he assured them, that confidence wouldn't cure. I told them their soldier forebears would turn over in their graves if they heard some of the stories I had heard about the behavior of some of our troop leaders in combat. The job of a commander was to be up where the crisis of action was taking place. In time of battle, I wanted division commanders to be up with their forward battalions, and I wanted corps commanders up with the regiment that was in the hottest action. If they had paperwork to do, they could do it at night. By day, their place was up there where the shooting was going on. It could never have been said that this professional soldier, the son of a regular Army colonel, had failed to set an example in his own career. As the commander of an airborne division, he had jumped along with his men in Normandy. Seldom seen in Korea without a grenade attached to his harness, Ridgway insisted that it was not a gesture of showmanship. In mobile warfare, a man might be surprised by the enemy when he least expected it, he said, and a grenade was useful for blasting one's way out of a tight spot. Ridgway's Declaration of Faith. After completing his tour of the combat area, the commanding general concluded that one thing was still lacking. Soldiers of the 8th Army hadn't as yet been given an adequate answer to the questions, why are we here, and what are we fighting for? In the belief that the men were entitled to an answer from their commanding general, he sat down in his room and wrote this declaration of faith. To me the issues are clear. It is not a question of this or that Korean town or village. Real estate is here, incidental. The real issues are whether the power of Western civilization, as God has permitted it to flower in our own beloved lands, shall defy and defeat communism, whether the rule of men who shoot their prisoners, enslave their citizens, and deride the dignity of man shall displace the rule of those to whom the individual and individual rights are sacred, whether we are to survive with God's hand to guide and lead us, or to perish in the dead existence of a godless world. If these be true, and to me they are, beyond any possibility of challenge, then this has long since ceased to be a fight for freedom for our Korean allies alone and for their national survival. It has become, and it continues to be, a fight for our own freedom, for our own survival, in an honorable, independent national existence. The deep conviction of this declaration could not be doubted. But Ridgway did not confine himself to moral leadership. He also insisted on a return to sound tactical principles. Upon learning that some of the infantry commanders in combat sectors had no knowledge of the enemy's strength or whereabouts, he ordered that aggressive patrolling be resumed at once. He directed further that every unit make a resolute effort to provide a hot reception for the Red Chinese patrols which had met too little opposition while prodding every night for soft spots along the thinly held 135-mile United Nations line. In his talks with officers and men, the new commander told them that too many weapons and vehicles had fallen into the hands of the enemy during the withdrawals in West Korea. He made it plain that in the future any man abandoning equipment without good cause would be court-martialed. Not only did Ridgway stress the increased use of firepower, he requested in one of his first messages to the Pentagon that 10 additional battalions of artillery be sent to Korea. These guns were to provide the tactical punch when he found an opportunity to take the offensive. Meanwhile, he had the problem of putting up a defense against a Chinese communist offensive expected within a week. On his first day as 8th Army commander, he sent a request to President Syngman Rhee of the Republic of Korea for 30,000 native laborers to dig field fortifications. The energetic 71-year-old Korean patriot provided the first 10,000 at dawn the following morning and the others during the next 2 days. Armed with picks and shovels, this army of toilers created 2 broad belts of defense, one to the north and one to the south of the Han River. The purpose of the first was to stop the enemy if American firepower could compensate for lack of numbers, and the second was a final line to be held resolutely. Although the Marine ground forces found themselves in the unusual situation of being 200 miles behind the front, they could be sure that this respite wouldn't last. Every effort was being pushed to restore the division to combat efficiency by a command and staff acutely aware of shortages of men and equipment. The effective strength on 29 December 1950 was 1,304 officers and 20,696 men, including 182 attached U.S. Army troops and 143 Royal Marine Commandos. This total also included 28 officers and 1,615 men who had arrived in a replacement draft of 17 December, and 4 officers and 365 men in a draft of 3 days later. Authorized division strength was 1,438 officers and 24,504 men, indicating a shortage of 134 officers and 3,808 men. Most of the deficiencies were in the infantry and artillery units. 29 officers and 2,951 men in the 3 infantry regiments, and 38 officers and 538 men in the artillery. Division G1 had been informed by the FMF PAC representative in Japan that about 5,000 casualties were hospitalized there, and an unknown number had been evacuated to the United States because of overcrowding of hospitals in Japan. Such factors made it difficult to predict how many would return to the division, but G1 estimated from 500 to 1,000 in January. The situation in regard to division equipment might be summed up by saying that on 23 December there was a serious shortage of practically all essential items with the single exception of M1 rifles. Upon arrival at Masan, units had been required to submit stock status reports. Their lists were forwarded on 23 December to the commanding general, 8th Army, with a notification that requisitions had been submitted to the 2nd Logistical Command, U.S. Army, in Busan. It was requested that deliveries of supplies and equipment be speeded up so that the division could soon be restored to its former combat efficiency. A comparison of the totals of selected items on 23 and 31 December as listed on the following page shows that considerable progress was made during those 8 days. Bags sleeping. Allowance 23,000. 23 December 50 shortage 3,585. 31 December 50 shortage 0. Machine gun Browning caliber 30 M1919A4. Allowance 1,398, 23 December 50 shortage 338, 31 December 50 shortage 0. Bar 30 caliber. Allowance 904, 23 December 50 shortage 441, 31 December 50 shortage 0. Carbine 30 caliber M2. Allowance 11,084, 23 December 50 shortage 2,075, 31 December 50 shortage 0. Launcher rocket 3.5-inch M20. Allowance 396, 23 December 50 shortage 105, 31 December 50 shortage 0. Howitzer 105 mm. Allowance 54, 23 December 50 shortage 8, 31 December 50 shortage 0. Howitzer 155 mm. Allowance 18, 23 December 50 shortage 9, 31 December 50 shortage 0. Glasses field 7x50. Allowance 1,740, 23 December 50 shortage 1,305. 31 December 50 shortage, 1,006. Tank medium M4A3 dozer 105 mm. Allowance 12. 23 December 50 shortage, 7. 31 December 50 shortage, 7. Tank medium M26 90 mm. Allowance 85. 23 December 50 shortage, 16. 31 December 50 shortage, 12. Truck 1/4 ton 4x4. Allowance 641. 23 December 50 shortage, 105. 31 December 50 shortage, 58. Truck 1.5 ton 6x6 cargo. Allowance 54. 23 December 50 shortage, 3. 31 December 50 shortage, 0. Truck 2.5 ton 6x6 cargo. Allowance 737. 23 December 50 shortage, 124. 31 December 50 shortage, 33. Radio set SCR 536. Allowance 474. 23 December 50 shortage, 211. 31 December 50 shortage, 211. Radio set SCR 619. Allowance 137. 23 December 50 shortage, 74. 31 December 50 shortage, 49. Telephone EE8. Allowance 1,162. 23 December 50 shortage, 58. 31 December 50 shortage, 58. The 2nd Logistical Command in Pusan, commanded by Brigadier General Crump Garvin, U.S. Army, deserved much of the credit for the week's restoration of Marine equipment. Progress passed all expectations, considering that General Garvin was supplying other 8th Army units which had lost equipment during their withdrawal. There still existed on 29 December a requirement for clothing and individual equipment, and the spare parts problem remained acute. Ironically, the fact that the 1st Marine Division had brought most of its motor transport out from the Chosin Reservoir was a handicap at Masan. 8th Army units which had lost their vehicles were given priority for receiving new ones. This meant that the Marines must make the best of war-worn trucks. Marine Air Squadrons in action. While the ground forces trained in the Masan area, the Corsair Squadrons and the Jet Squadron flew combat missions. Support of the Hungnam redeployment had top priority until 24 December, when the last of the 105,000 troops were evacuated by Rear Admiral James H. Doyle's Task Force 90. Such totals as 91,000 Korean refugees, 17,500 vehicles, and 350,000 measurement tons of cargo were also recorded by the U.S. Navy's largest operation of the Korean conflict. No serious trouble was experienced from enemy action during the 2 weeks of the redeployment, although G2 reports warned that several Chinese divisions were believed to be in the general area. Airstrikes and naval gunfire shared the credit for this result. Nearly 34,000 shells and 12,800 rockets were fired by the support ships, and UN planes were on station or carrying out missions every moment that weather permitted. Marine fighters of VMF-212, VMF-214, and VMF-323, flying from carriers after the closing of Yeonpo Airfield, made a noteworthy contribution to the success of the Hungnam redeployment. VMF-212, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Richard W. Wachowski, was assigned the task of gathering the helicopters of VMO-6 from various ships of the 7th Fleet and returning them to the operational control of the 1st Marine Division at Masan. There, the OYs of the Observation Squadron were waiting after an overland flight, and Major Vincent J. Gottschalk's unit was complete. With the Hungnam redeployment ended, the Navy offered to make its primary carrier-borne air effort in support of the 8th Army. There was no single overall commander of Navy and Air Force aviation in Korea, other than General MacArthur himself, and the two services were working under a system of mutual agreement and coordination. The Far East Air Forces, FEAF, under Lieutenant General George E. Stratemeyer, was the senior Air Force command in the Far East, on the same level as ComNav-FE, Vice Admiral C. Turner Joy. The largest fief subordinate command was the 5th Air Force, commanded by Major General Earl E. Partridge, with headquarters at Taegu, alongside that of the 8th Army. Strictly speaking, land-based Marine Air had been under 5th Air Force operational control throughout the Chosin Reservoir operation. Actually, a verbal agreement between General Partridge and Major General Field Harris, commanding the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, MAW, had given the Marines a good deal of latitude in making decisions relative to close air support. This was often the salvation of Marine units during the breakout, when every minute counted. Later, during the Hungnam redeployment, control of Marine aircraft became the responsibility of Admiral Doyle. His control agency was Tactical Air Control Squadron 1, TACRON 1, in his flagship, the Mount McKinley. TACRON 1 kept in close touch not only with the 3rd Infantry Division U.S. Army, defending the shrinking perimeter, but also with the 8th Army and 5th Air Force. During the last days of 1950, the 4 Marine Air Squadrons were kept busy. VMF 212 on the Bataan was attached to TF-77. The coastline of East Korea was its hunting grounds for such missions as knocking out warehouses, bridges, and railway tunnels between the 38th and 39th parallels. Along the west coast, VMF 214 on the Sicily and VMF 323 on the Badong Strait were commanded respectively by Major William M. London and Major Arnold A. Lund. These squadrons were part of Task Group 95.1 under Vice Admiral Sir William G. Andrews, Royal Navy. The Marine aviators found themselves in an organization made up of Royal Commonwealth Naval Forces and of French, Thai, and ROC units. TG 95.1 had the responsibility for patrolling the western coastline to prohibit enemy movement by water in military junks and by vehicle along the littoral. VMF 311, the jet squadron commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Neil R. McIntyre, remained the only land-based Marine air unit in Korea. The 5th Air Force had made space for it on crowded K9, 7 air miles northeast of Pusan, when General Harris expressed a desire to keep his jets in Korea for possible defense against Red Air attacks. McIntyre exercised his prerogative as squadron commander to fly the unit's first combat mission on 17 December. He was not, however, the first Marine aviator to pilot a jet in combat. That distinction went to Captain Leslie E. Brown on 9 September 1950. Assigned to the 5th Air Force's 8th Fighter Bomber Squadron as an exchange pilot, he made the first of several routine flights with an F-80 Shooting Star. On 20 December, 17 officers and 51 enlisted men arrived at K9 to boost VMF 311's total to 27 officer pilots and 95 enlisted men. Under 5th Air Force control, they were employed to attack suspected CCF troop shelters, entrenchments, and gun positions on the eve of the expected enemy offensive. Missions of the jet planes averaged 12 a day at the end of the month. The Air Force System of Control. It was seldom realized in the middle of the 20th century that for the first time since the Middle Ages, a single human being represented in his person a decisive tactical unit. Just as the mailed knight on his barded charter had ruled the battlefields of the medieval world, so did the pilot of a modern aircraft have the power to put an enemy battalion to flight with napalm or to knock out an enemy stronghold with a 500-pound bomb. A great deal depended, of course, on how the lightning of this human thunderbolt was controlled. The Marine Corps and the Air Force had different ideas on the subject. At the foundation of the Marine system was the concept that the needs of the ground forces came first, and control of air support should be exercised by the troops being supported. In each Marine Infantry Battalion, a Tactical Air Control Party, TACP, included 2 aviators, one to be employed as a forward air controller, FAC, at the front, and the other as an air liaison officer in the Battalion Supporting Arms Center, SAC. In an emergency, both could quickly be assigned to companies or even platoons to talk airstrikes down on the enemy. The normal chain of command was bypassed in favor of direct radio from the TACP to the Cognizant Air Control Agency that had the authority to cross-check the requests for possible conflict with other operations and to channel fighter bombers to the attack. Intermediate commands kept themselves informed of the overall air picture and controlled the employment of aviation by their own subordinates as they listened in on these requests. They indicated approval by remaining silent and disapproval by transmitting a countermand. The hub of the Air Force system was the Tactical Air Control Center, TACC, of the 5th Air Force, USAC, Joint Operations Center, JOC, known by the code name Mello. An aviator coming on duty called up Mello and received his instructions from JOC. Facts were assigned to U.S. Army and British units down to corps, division, and regimental levels, and to ROC corps and divisions. Further assignment to smaller frontline units was possible but entailed a good deal of time and advanced planning. And even the most urgent requests had to be channeled through division and regimental levels to JOC for approval. If a Marine FAC wasn't able to control an airstrike visually because of terrain conditions, he called for a Tactical Air Coordinator Airborne, TACA, to locate the target from the air and direct planes to the attack. The 5th Air Force also used Special Airborne Coordinators. Known as Mosquitoes, they flew low-winged, two-seater North American training planes, designated T-6s by the Air Force and SNJs by the Navy. This plan was capable under favorable circumstances of providing the 5th Air Force USAC Tactical Air Control System with a mobile and flexible means of directing air power at the front. Its chief weakness, according to Marine doctrine, lay in the separation of air power from ground force control. The Air Force claimed the advantage of projecting tactical air power deep into enemy territory, but as the Marines saw it, this was deep or interdictory support and not to be compared to genuine close air support. 10 Corps Conference at Gyeongju. The command and staff of the 1st Marine Division could only speculate during this interim period as to what the near future might hold for them. Rumors had been circulated, during the first week at Masan, that the division would be employed as rearguard to cover an 8th Army withdrawal from Korea, with Pusan serving as the port of debarkation. And while plans cannot be made on a basis of rumor, General Smith and Colonel Bowser went so far as to discuss the possibility seriously. At last, on 24 December, a more definite prospect loomed when the USAC staff requested the division to furnish logistical data for a move by rail and truck to Wonju, some 130 miles north of Masan. It was not known whether an actual move was contemplated or the intention was merely to have available a plan for future use if the occasion warranted. General Smith sent the data but added a strong recommendation to the effect that any commitment of the division be postponed until it was re-equipped and strengthened by replacements. At this time, the Marine General received a copy of a map prepared by the 8th Army staff which showed the phase lines of a 200-mile withdrawal from the combat zone to the Pusan port of debarkation. No enlightenment as to the employment of the division was forthcoming until 27 December 1950, however, when a USAC dispatch directed that the Marines be detached from 8th Army Reserve and reassigned to the operational control of 10 Corps. A message of the 28th requested General Smith to attend a conference at the 10 Corps CP at Gyeongju, about 60 air miles northeast of Masan, on the 30th. He was directed to bring several members of his staff with him and to assign a liaison officer to 10 Corps. 2 VM-06 helicopters flew him to Gyeongju along with his G3 Colonel Bowser and his aide, Captain Martin J. Sexton. Tossed by high winds, they landed just in time to meet General Ridgway, who gave a talk emphasizing the necessity for reconnaissance and maintaining contact with the enemy. The new plan for 10 Corps employment, as modified after discussion with the 8th Army commander, called for the recently reorganized 2nd Infantry Division to be placed under operational control of General Almond. It was to move out at once to the Wonju front, followed by the 3rd and 7th Infantry Divisions. The 1st Marine Division was to stage at Pohang on the east coast, some 65 miles north of Pusan, with a view to being eventually employed on this same front. Certainly no one could accuse General Ullman, the 10 Corps commander, of defeatism, was a tribute paid by General Smith. On the contrary, the Marine general had sometimes differed with him on the grounds that he was aggressive to the point of giving too little weight to logistical considerations and time and space factors. It was realized at the conference that administrative decisions must depend to a large extent on the outcome of the impending enemy offensive. G2 officers of the 8th Army, forewarned by prisoner interrogations, were not surprised when the blow fell shortly before midnight on the last night of the year. In spite of Air Force bombings of roads and suspected supply dumps, the Chinese Reds had been able to mount a great new offensive only 3 weeks after the old one ended. Attacking in the bitter cold of New Year's Eve, they made penetrations during the first few hours in rock-held sectors of the central and eastern fronts. By daybreak, it became evident that Seoul was a major objective, with the UN situation deteriorating rapidly.